Welcome to the Northpointe Plus podcast.
Blah, 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 blah.
This is episode 124.
124.
Yep, I'm your guest host, Brent Conlon. We're here today with lead pastor Rick Rubel and Daniel. What's your last name?
Vargas.
Daniel Vargas, who spoke yesterday.
Vargas.
Yeah.
Daniel
Vargas,
Vargas.
yeah.
Did a great job yesterday.
Daniel was
Thank
great.
you very much. I was very nervous, and I'm pretty sure it showed. But I was just trying to share my strength and experience and hope.
Yeah, you did great.
Thank
Yes.
you.
That's a lot of people to stand in front of. I was nervous for you.
Yeah, first service, I didn't know that many people. I knew a couple people, but second service is more comfortable just simply because that's the service me and my wife, Melissa, usually go to.
And most of your life groups in second service.
Yeah.
So that's cool. You did great. It was, well, you know what? We're just jumping in, right? You told me a number of people talked to you in the lobby in between services and just said from their perspective how much courage it took for you to share your story.
Yeah, it was really amazing because I think that I didn't really have much time like in between services, just simply because there was a group of like 8-9 people that would come up to me and say, "Oh wow, you got guts," because I couldn't do that, but I can relate to your story.
Yeah. Let me just. I'll play the host for a minute. You can jump in and ask questions whenever you're on. Sure. When you were done, did you feel a sense of freedom or a sense of concern about what other people will think? Like, how'd you feel after both services were done?
Well, it was a little nervous. So nervous, but it felt really good to share my story with everyone in first service and second service. All my life groups probably heard it numerous times. They're like, yeah. But it kind of felt like when you were at my speaker meeting, and which really threw me off. And I was, it felt really good. The first 20 minutes is really nervous.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. So Daniel's speaker meeting that he's talking about, he shared his story with his AA group last summer, late last summer, early last fall.
Yeah, late summer.
Somewhere in there. And he invited me to come as he shared his story. And that was the first time that you'd done that, right? In that setting.
Yeah. It was the first time. I plan on doing another one, but not for a while. I just want to work myself and better familiar with the steps.
Yeah. I would just say this as we dive into really questions and stuff. I think the biggest thing that people are afraid of when they make their inventory, or when step 5, when they tell a mentor or a group, that when they share their story, when they confess their stuff to someone, the biggest fear that everybody has is, what will people think of me? Will it change the way our friendship is? Will they think less of me? Will they not want to be friends with me anymore if they know my stuff? And that's a legitimate fear, because sometimes people can be cruel. But I think more often than not, when we share our stuff, our addiction, our sin, whatever it is, that there is this sense of freedom that comes for us and grace that typically comes from other people, because they know that they're hiding stuff too, that they've not told their story.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think being at that point of vulnerability is really tough for people. But once you start to do it once or twice, it becomes really easy to talk about. Am I happy? Were those my proudest moments? No, they were not. But is change taking place?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's cool. Share some of your story.
Well, I was going to add something to that too. I assume that was an open meeting. For people who have never been to an AA meeting, they have open and closed meetings, and so the requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. Rick would probably be asked to leave a closed meeting if he was just there to observe. They don't allow that. So an open meeting is where family and friends can go and watch speaker talks, or, sometimes they have open meetings for couples and whatnot.
Yeah.
Just for those who are unaware of that situation.
Thanks. Yeah, good clarity. So what's your story? How much of your story you want to talk about?
I don't always share a lot of that story. I have been in and out of recovery most of my adult life, and mostly, like you were talking about, the idea of fear of judgment. I've never felt that from people in recovery. You know, I mean, to share a fourth step with a sponsor is totally natural to me. I mean, not that I love talking about the lowest points of my life, but for people in society to find out things that I'm not ashamed of, that's not something that I go around boasting about. And so I think that's something that can't be undersold is the amount of guilt and shame that people who deal with addictions, I don't care what the addiction is, doesn't have to be drugs and alcohol. I mean, gambling, pornography, video games. The amount of things that people can carry shame with, you know, those are things. I mean, some people take that stuff to their grave, and those secrets that we think we're taking to our grave, you know, they talk a lot about that in recovery. You know, sick is our secrets. I mean, those are the things that drive people back out, and so there is relief in talking to people that you trust.
Yeah,
but sharing that with a room full of people who are not necessarily in recovery, that seems terrifying to me, and I was impressed.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because we talked in my life group last week. We were talking about this concept and just about what you need to share, what you have to share, where you share it, how you do that. And I think the whole, what you just said is really good. That if you have a mentor, if you have a sponsor, if you have an accountability partner that you know that you can trust, talking about your stuff, talking about your secrets, provides a tremendous amount of freedom. And when you share that even out in a different context, and typically that's a more sanitized version, but it's not the worst of the worst stuff. But when you do that, there still is this sense of freedom. And I said to Daniel after service yesterday, realize that there are going to be people talking to you for the next few weeks, for the next few months, maybe for the next few years, because you had the courage to stand up and say, yeah, this is my story, and this is what God's doing. This is how I found transformation. But it was unmanageable. You know, it was a mess. So yeah.
Yeah, and I would imagine, I mean, in recovery they deal with sponsors, but I mean a Christian mentor, somebody that you're sharing your life with, I would imagine same value.
Right.
I would imagine you've developed. I mean, maybe you're not doing that through AA or NA or any of the other recovery programs. You're doing that as a relationship with somebody who you're both trying to develop a closer relationship with Christ, and that's where you're going with the stuff. I would imagine same value.
Yep, I think absolutely that's true. Yeah.
Well, that's us. It looks like we've got a whole lot of stuff to cover. Would you like to talk about what you shared on Sunday?
Yeah.
Where would you like to go first?
So there are so many things. We were talking before we jumped on the podcast, and Brent said, "Wait, Howard, how do you got like pages of stuff?" I said, "Yeah, that's stuff that would have made it in the message. It didn't." I just want to talk about step 4. So step 4, we made searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So you go through this process of being honest with yourself about where you've been, what you've done, who you are, all that stuff. And I think for anyone, whether you're in recovery from the what some people say the big addiction, anytime that you're dealing with addiction to sin, that process is critical in terms of really owning your sin, because that's why Jesus came. You know, if you only think of Jesus as the Savior in a big generic way, that's very different than saying Jesus came to save me from these things that I've done, these patterns that I've lived. That all of a sudden the glory of who he is and his love for us it just becomes lots more real. It changes. So let me ask you guys, when you did step 4, I kind of did this a little bit yesterday. How critical is it that you write it down?
For me, it was really scary at the beginning. I think I procrastinated. I would tell my sponsor, yeah, I have it written down. I just don't got it worded the right way. And this went on for maybe 2-3 weeks. And then finally he called me and said, hey, we need to talk about step 4. And so I had written it down, and I felt the first time I did my 4th step was just hit the key people that I had resentments against.
Yeah.
And then I could go through and do a 4th step any other time after that, after I've gone through all the steps once. Mom, dad, brother, sister, usually a lot of times, a lot of resentments are built up towards people closer to you. So that's how I did it. And then, so we went through columns. We went through how you felt, how it made you feel, and why do you think you felt that way? And basically giving, pulling self-examination out of you.
Yeah. So you weren't just listing things. You're trying to figure out what was going on inside you that ultimately drove you to drinking, but that caused damage in the lives of yourself or others.
Right.
What about you, Brent?
Well, I think the writing down is important because you get it on paper, which is probably easier than facing a human being and sharing.
Yep.
So you're trying to be fearlessly honest and get all of that stuff down on paper, so that when you do meet with whoever you're meeting with after that, you've got things to talk about. And it is interesting. You can Google search a 4th step and see how they do, like the columns, like Dan was talking about, your action, your thoughts behind it, the character defects that led to that type of behavior, jealousy, greed, resentment, which there tends to be a lot of resentments with people, even though it's crazy how much we resent others when we're causing so much damage in other people's lives. But the thoughts behind it is neat to write that stuff down. Hopefully you have a trusted person that you're going to that can help you sort that stuff out. Because ultimately, in the end, the goal is to find out, what is my role in this? Yeah. Not how have I been harmed.
Yeah.
I'm a wrecking ball. How have I harmed others? What was I doing?
Yeah, and you can't change unless you're dealing with you. Because it really is not, we can't control what anybody else does to us. We can only act in such a way that it deals with us and the way that we respond to everything around us. You said something that triggered something for me, Brent. I forget what it was. Let me just talk for a couple of things. I know what it was. I think if you're not, maybe you've just started going to A or to one of the 12-step groups, or maybe you haven't, and this series is just triggering stuff. I think there's a fear, or at least a reluctance to take step 4 because you think, okay, searching in fearless moral inventory, I don't have time to list everything that's wrong with everything that's in my life. And I think that the encouragement that I would say is just start with the biggest stuff. Just think, I just want to start with the things that I resent about people, the resentments that I hold, or my major things, just 4 or 5 things. You start to write, and your pen becomes like, this is bad illustration, but bad picture, vomit, right? You just start to write, and it just starts coming. You open up, and it takes off. One of you guys?
Yeah, that's exactly how it was, because I would read it over and over just to make sure I'd get it right, and then there I go, crossing this out, editing this, editing this, and then adding this, and then get going on something different, getting totally off the main topic, but this was still a resentment with that same person that I had.
Yeah. Let me just talk about some stuff with step 4. I think it's critical that you understand that the reason why you're doing step 4. It's not just because I say, oh, you need to do step 4, as your friend, pastor, mentor, whatever it is. It's the purpose of step 4 is so that you can have a greater understanding of yourself, and so that you can accept yourself, warts and all, flaws and all that stuff, and ultimately so that you can begin to love yourself rather than despise yourself for all the stuff that you've done. I think that's critical. I think it's important to write it down, to do step 4, to face the truth of what your behavior has done. I think a lot of times we explain it away. We say, oh, if this person hadn't done that, I would have never done that. That's not really my responsibility. But when you start writing things down, you realize the wake of havoc that you've created in your life and in the lives of other people. And I think that you do step 4 because it helps you understand patterns. Oh, there's this pattern in my life. When this happened to me, I did this. And you see that. Any thoughts on that stuff?
I got a thought. I was thinking, and this is to go back just a little bit. I really thought something that you said yesterday in church, that church could use more AA and AA could use more church, or more Jesus. Sorry.
Yeah.
I thought that was brilliant. I thought that was just because I've always thought that. I mean, it is something that has bothered me about recovery programs. Is I've been in rooms where people have been asked to leave for mentioning Jesus in a room, and I just can't deal with that. But more importantly, how useful in all facets of our life to be completely honest with ourselves about our behavior, and to learn that the answer is through Christ.
Yeah.
And then to be constantly taking, you notice it in the world, that people who don't really like to do self-awareness. I mean, who really loves to be self-aware of their shortcomings.
Right.
But it's a premise of that program. You don't get anywhere in recovery if you're not, honest about your shortcomings.
Right.
And I think the whole world could use that. And so I don't even remember what you asked me, but I was thinking about that while you were talking. How useful this is for everybody.
Yeah.
And why it's like I was mentioning to some other people about how our church is doing a sermon series on the 12 steps, and they were like, really, interested in that. And I thought, yeah, it's pretty brilliant. I mean, the world could use this stuff.
Right.
And there's great examples of it found throughout the Bible of people who live the 12 steps.
Yeah.
But the way that they spell them out, it's, those guys who wrote the 12 steps were pretty brilliant. And it's
the thing that, as an outsider coming in and really studying the steps really for the first time in my life for this series, brilliant's a great word, because it is, every step is a tiny step. But the progress that you make in taking that tiny step, and you begin to string together those tiny steps, the transformation is radical. And the whole purpose of the 12 steps, I would say from our perspective, is to turn people to Jesus. It's to allow them to experience the transformation that can only come from Jesus. Because you can do the steps without Jesus and experience freedom from alcohol or addiction, whatever it is. But it's like, oh man, that 75 or 80% you get for life is good, but that last 20 or 25% that comes with Jesus is the thing that makes life so different, so valuable, so fulfilling, because Jesus came to save us. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Excuse me. I felt like when I shared yesterday, when I had my 11-mile walk, it was I was reflecting on everything that had led up to this moment, and I always knew that there was a God. I didn't know how much He loved me until then, still to this moment. I know He tremendously loves us, and that I'm so blessed to have that.
Yeah. Well, let me talk a little bit more about step 4, and you guys jump in wherever. I think it's critical when you think about step 4 to know that that God wants to help you do step 4. that God has given us the Holy Spirit to be able to do that. And so when you go through step 2 and 3, that's the prep work to say, yeah, God can do this. I believe that God can help me do this, and that God will help you do that. I think some of the benefit of step 4 is that it forces us, it helps us to deal with the pain and the grief that we've caused. It really is like a mirror to say, oh, when I replay that scene from that point in time, and I look with a different point of view rather than just from inside my body, that's the hurt, the pain, all the stuff that I caused in that. That's healthy. It's not fun, but it's healthy to go through that process, to be able to go on a new path. And unless you face that, change doesn't happen. Anything?
I've got a thought on this.
Go ahead.
Pre-Christian recovery for me. I mean, the idea of doing that without Jesus now would terrify me. I don't know. It's like a mental thing. The difference between thinking about God, the creator of the universe, and Jesus, who came here and showed us so much love that, for me, they talk about this in recovery, that you better have a God. You better have something when push comes to shove. And I don't care what it is in your life that you're struggling with. Where do you go when you can't get somebody on the phone or you're alone in your thoughts? You go to God. Well, if your view of God, this my thought, is generic, you don't really have a way that you don't have a concept of God.
Of a personal God.
It wasn't until I learned about, I thought the Bible was fiction most of my life. So it wasn't until I developed this concept of Jesus and what he did for us and how much he shows love that it seems to make that reaching out for help on a daily basis, praying 10 times a day, like doing what I do, easier because I know who I'm praying to. Right.
You know him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's real. Yeah. We've kind of talked around this, but again, let me just restate again. Just want to be clear on this. It's important to do step 4 with a sponsor or a mentor, with somebody who will love you, who's been there, ideally, who understands, who could say, yeah, I know, I get that. I was there. That's a critical piece. I talked about it a little bit in the message on Sunday as well. It's important to have a group of people that can provide that same kind of context as well, that love you in spite of knowing your story, that love you no matter what. It makes all the difference in the world. I can think of so many people who, when they began to have a group, it was like all of a sudden that loved them in spite of all the stuff. They came alive. It was like there's a difference in their face, in their visage. There's a difference in terms of the way that they lived. It just was cool. So having a group to be able to hear other people's stories and be encouraged, and to be able to encourage others. And let me just go a side tangent on this. Sometimes we think, I don't want to go to life group. I got nothing to give. I'm not getting anything out of it. I can't encourage you enough to say your presence at group, God will speak to you when you least expect it. And sometimes your presence makes all the difference in the world. That somebody will say, I knew you were going to be there. I knew you were going to be there, and that mattered. So don't downplay your role either as a giver or a receiver in the context of a meeting. You said 3 meetings a week. With you off work, you'll probably do a meeting every day.
Yeah, a meeting every day. I'd like to just say that on the life group front, that is really awesome. I think as brothers and sisters in the church, we're supposed to be held accountable to each other. So if I got a little something that I can help you with, here, please take it. Take, and sometimes I need to hear what you have to say because it helps me. And that's the way it is in AA too. I grow off your experience, even a newcomer, I grow off his experience because I've been at that desperate point where this is, life or death.
Yeah. Yeah. When in December of 21, when stuff changed, you took your first steps. Were you going to a meeting every day then?
Yeah. I knew I had to be, steadfast in my recovery. So I had to be on it. I didn't want to lag around it anymore. I didn't want to procrastinate, because I feel like a lot of time when you're out in addiction, the first step, before you even step foot into an AA club or, any kind of recovery club. So like I had to stay in, and constantly just learn and listen. And a long time before, so I knew, but I had to just listen. And because I didn't know how I was going to stay sober, I knew that during, while I was on probation, that I had to stay sober for the courts. But after that, once I came off probation, how was I going to stay sober?
Yeah.
So I had to steadfast, be active in my recovery.
Yeah. Let me loop in for everybody who's listening, watching, whatever. If you're not, if you're not an alcoholic, if you're not in the midst of drug addiction, if you're not sexual addiction, gambling addiction, whatever, the stuff that we're talking about right now in step 4 and recognizing the power that sin has in your life, it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. The difference is, for most of us as Christians, we think, my sin's not that bad. It doesn't really have that deep of claws in my life. The roots aren't that deep. Jesus came, I accepted him. It's all good. Yeah, there's problems sometimes, but it's not that bad. And I just think we can't understand how wonderful God's grace is if we don't understand how despicable our sin is, no matter what that sin is, because it all separates us from God. So yeah. Anything? You guys look very pensive right now. A couple of other things, several other things that happen with step 4. When you write those things down, it's freeing in the sense that it allows you to recognize that you don't have to be perfect, because you're doing a searching and fearless moral inventory. It's not just of all of the crud from your life. It's you're looking at yourself, and that you don't have to be perfect. I think that's really important. I think when you go through the process of writing things down, it's important to resist the urge to focus entirely on what other people have done to you, and to look instead at, okay, yeah, they may have done that. What did I do to cause that? How did I light the fire that created their reaction that then made me react in such a bad way? Again, it drives everything to say, okay, what is it with me? Where are the character flaws in me? Where are the places that I've just been so off the rails that have caused that in other people? Last thing I want to say about step 4, and then we can kind of talk about some other stuff. We don't feel like you have to rush it. Don't feel like you have to say, okay, I'm going to take Saturday afternoon, and from 1 to 3, I'm going to do step 4. And when it's done, I'll be good. Step 4 is an ongoing process. Is that true?
Yeah, for me, it's very true. It won't be the last time I do a step 4. It's, if I'm going to continue in my recovery, it's got to be constant, and I think it's said a lot in AA that it's never a one and done type program.
Yeah.
I'm never going to graduate from recovery. I'm always going to be in recovery. Do I handle situations better now because I got these tools that I can use to, help me through my walk in life? Number one is, obvious, God. I need God every day in my life to help me move forward. But handling situations, people, places, things, that I'm always going to need help with those.
Yeah. Brent, anything?
Yeah, I would say that I've done a few, and they've tended to be pretty lengthy. You were mentioning like setting a 2-hour limit. That's probably difficult.
Yeah.
I did one that was probably 10, 12 pages long, which for me is a lot of writing.
Yeah.
But it is nice, like you said, the continuing thing. It's nice as you work your way through the steps that you end up at the 10th step where you're continuing to take personal inventory. When we're wrong, promptly admitted it. You're trying to not add new things to that list of things that you need to clean up anymore, which is, again, the brilliance of those steps.
Yeah.
That as we improve and we heal, we then learn how to stop. It's one thing to know your character defects.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Cut it out. Stop living that way, which is easier said than done.
Yeah.
Especially with a compulsive personality. It wasn't a conscious decision to do some of the things that people do in their lifetime. I don't think there's a whole lot of people that have had addictions that thought, I'm really proud of that behavior.
Yeah. I want to grow up to be an alcoholic.
I
want to grow up to have a drug
I'm really
addiction.
happy I
Yeah.
drove people in my life away from me. More important, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
What was I doing to do that? How do I knock that behavior off?
Yeah.
That's why I say it's useful for everybody. Taking the self-awareness that comes with working the steps has been critical in my life. I didn't mess up the mics, did I? Good. I don't want to pull a Jake.
We've talked about resentment. There was something that I just wanted I wanted this to find its way into the message, and it didn't. I love this quote, and this came out of Hunger for Healing. Resentment causes violence in violent people and illness in nonviolent people. So when you hold on to things, when you resent others, when you resent your circumstance, whatever it is, and that gets inside you and festers, if you're prone to violence, all of a sudden that's where stuff starts to break, where you're throwing things, where you're hurting people, where you're doing all kinds of stuff. And if you're not prone to violence, I think what happens a lot of times is that person, again, as that sits inside us and festers, they end up in the hospital, sometimes with things that are diagnosable and sometimes with symptoms that the docs say, we can't figure out what's going on with you. Something's obviously wrong, but we don't know why. And it's because that resentment has just not had a chance to be released. And so step 4 happens with that. What insight can you guys give about step 5? Step 5, we admitted to God, to ourselves, to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. We've talked a little bit about that. We've talked actually probably a lot about that, huh?
Yeah, I feel like being an alcoholic and knowing these resentments, I knew them all throughout step 4, but they really came to life when I had to tell someone else. Because that's where, for me, it kept a lot of shame and guilt and remorse about these things, and having to admit it to someone else, that was really scary. After I did it, it felt great, and my sponsor says, "Oh, that's all you did? Here, let me tell you about this." And we compared stories, but
Yeah.
I mean, not for good, but to dissect them and for to help us learn from them. I remember one of the biggest things that I struggled with step 5 was being honest. I've sold myself short many times, so I could do that. I could lie to a sponsor and not get recovery. And number 3 was to honestly say to God, that I want to repent of these sins.
Yeah.
My addiction. That was really hard because I don't want to lie to God.
Yeah. Yeah. Brent, anything?
Yeah, I thought, yeah, he makes a great point. And I thought too, I remember one of the guys in my life telling me, God loves you no matter what, after we went over this fifth step. So you share that with somebody that you trust. Similar experiences. They laugh, take away some of the how huge you feel that this stuff is that you've done. Some of it is huge,
Right.
And so, it's nice to have somebody let you know, you're still a human being. God loves you.
Yeah.
Let's give this to God. And then we're praying. So we would pray before the fifth step. We prayed after the fifth step. You've already learned, how to start turning stuff over to God by this point, but it's a practice. This is stuff I'm feeling a lot of guilt and shame over. Let's give this to God. Let's turn this stuff over. Just useful stuff. It's that learning how to. I don't know about people. I know people who grew up Christian and had a great Christian upbringing, and God was a big part of their life. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's not your story.
That's not a given.
Yeah.
People just grow up knowing that you go to God for help with your struggles. That wasn't mine. So I had to learn that, I can't handle this stuff on my own. I've proven it. And another human being is a human being. So they're not going to fix me, and God can.
Yeah.
So it's a practice.
Yeah, and let's talk for just a second about that concept that you just talked about, because Daniel, you referred to it as well. I don't know what the language that you guys have used, what happens in a group, but if you're an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic for the rest of your life. It's an addiction that you struggle with for the rest of your life. And yet, in the context, especially of the power of God, it's temptation that stays there to spiral back into the old patterns. And yet God does give the victory. And so your life is different. While the temptation to go back there is real, the life that you experience now has been transformed. And that's, again, I'd come back to the whole purpose of the 12 steps it is for life transformation. It's for you to be a different person than you were before. This is not just the same old person cleaned up. You become a different person when you work the steps with God in the center of that, doing the change. Agree, disagree?
I totally agree. Now with these tools and with God's help, I have, been relieved of insanity. I'm back to sane,
Yeah.
So, I didn't get here just to be here. This program is taking me this far, so we're going to have to keep doing what we're doing. You know what? It's so great. I'm so grateful to have found a home group that I love, in AA and my life group, I just love going, I love being part of, and like I said, if my message can help someone, glad to share it.
Anything?
The only other thing I would say, you mentioned the concept of if you're an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic.
Yeah.
If you're an addict, you're always an addict. And I think people stay sober for long periods of time in recovery. They talk about that built-in forgetter, which
Would describe that.
In recovery, they would call that the addict mind. I call that Satan, okay?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Planning those thoughts. Well, you've got this beat. You don't need God. You don't need to talk to people. You don't need to read. You don't need to go to meetings. You don't need to do these things anymore. You've got life where you want it, and you did it. Look at that's the worst. Look at what I've accomplished, right?
Because it's back to control. It's back to me being in control. Yeah.
All of the things that got us to that position, right?
Yeah.
And so my experience has been that, I had periods of my life where had been sober for several years, life was great, and had a full-time God in my life, and then forgot.
Had a full-time God in your life?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then forgot what got me there. And then went through struggles, went through a divorce, and in a million years never would have thought that would be an option to go back to that life. No way. That will never, ever, there's no way that could have, look at how much I have to lose, and made that decision, you know? So I do think that, yeah, even though I would like to think that I'm a recovered addict, alcoholic, I don't know that I am ever fully recovered. They certainly claim that we're not.
Yeah.
And my experience has been, if I really want to know if I'm recovered, they would say, well, go try some controlled drinking and find out if you've recovered, you know, which that's a pretty dangerous experiment.
Yep.
Yeah. I think.
Go gamble if you have a gambling issue. See how that goes for you.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off.
No, that's okay. What's really interesting, you know, I talked 2 weeks ago about recognizing as a teenager in a video arcade the compulsive nature of the compulsive addictive nature that exists in me. Grandfather was an alcoholic. Grandfather was a gambler. And when I said 2 weeks ago it scared me, was because I realized if I ever started to gamble, I recognize about myself I couldn't stop. I know I would think I'm smart enough. I can figure out a system to beat this. You know what? I can do it, and I would just, the money would just go away. And all of the stuff that would happen along with that. So for me, I've always drawn a boundary really close to saying, I don't want to buy lottery tickets. I don't want to, don't want to do any of that stuff. I do think, back to the question that we were just talking about before, that there is a recognition that our addiction to sin, we're never free from. So it's not just that, oh, you're an alcoholic, you're always... We're addicted to sin. And the only way that we can deal with that is to say, only by God's grace with the power of Jesus can I go forward and live in my relationship with him. And when we do that, when it's all about him and not about us, we experience incredible freedom and joy and stuff. We're going to wind down. There's a couple of questions that came in that are.
Hey, by the way, I have one really quick thought for you on that.
Yeah.
One thing that I would relate to anybody who's listening who, let's say, has never dealt with what you would consider a big addiction. Okay. Honesty. Okay. So I do know people who have been truthful and honest their entire life. I mean, we don't really know how other people live their lives, but when you are dealing with addiction, what tends to come with that is a lot of dishonesty.
Yeah.
You know, you feel guilt, shame, you want people off your back, you lie.
Yeah.
So that's part of the practice of these steps, is living a rigorously honest life. And I have to pray about that every day. Remind me to be honest when I'm tempted to tell a lie, which is difficult. And that would be another thing. I mean, for anybody how often do people have to fight the urge to, somebody asks you a question, you don't really feel like answering that honestly? Oh, yeah, it's just a little white lie, it didn't hurt anybody. Well, that's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I like to think, well, Christians don't lie, but I'm pretty sure everybody struggles with their own things.
Sure. And sometimes that slippery slope, the top of the slippery slope, is about something stupid.
Relevant.
I remember a friend of mine who's a pastor. He was talking about being honest, and in his message, he said, somebody asked me this week how much weight I had lost. He said, and I said, I've lost 17 pounds. He said, I was on the scale that day. I know, I've lost 15 pounds. What's the difference between 15 and 17? Why is 17 so much better than 15? And yet that's sometimes, man, that's where we go. It's just something little, and then all of a sudden the line gets blurry. Yeah.
But I think there's people who wouldn't do that.
Oh.
I think there's people that if you asked them how much weight they would say 15, and they would feel guilty if they didn't.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a bad person. I don't walk around compulsively lying or anything.
Yeah.
But I don't know what that feels like to just have been natural my whole life. It's something about being a kid. I didn't want to get in trouble. I learned how to be sneaky with my parents, and that's something that I think a lot of people who deal with addictions probably experienced that growing up.
Yeah, and I do think that the Holy Spirit can do His work in us to prompt us to say, no. 15, yeah, and then I hope this is not too personal, but I can't even remember which service it was. But I had a conscious thought yesterday when you were talking that you said something in one of the services, and you stopped and went back and corrected it, and it was a little thing that didn't matter. I don't even remember what it was, but I thought, oh, that's it. That's being honest, searching fearless moral inventory about our own honesty. So maybe not, maybe you just misspoke and went back, but I just thought that's good. It's good. Woo.
Yeah. So like, so we can get to the questions, I just wanted to say that, number one offender in the Bible and the Big Book is pride, your ego, and addiction, sin, alcoholism is, cunning, baffling, powerful, and patient, very patient. They say that the devil's in the parking lot doing push-ups waiting for me,
Yeah.
So when I'm at a meeting, I have to, be steadfast in my recovery.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, that's great. Rick, I'm looking at these 3 pages here. I can't tell what is
Page
your
one.
notes and what are questions.
Page one that has the header at the top that says 12 steps.
Yeah.
Then it has a number 1
Okay,
and a
I
number
see.
2.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Number 1. I'm a life group leader. I feel like I have a lot of people who I mentor. How do I find someone to mentor me? It's probably weird to just go up and ask somebody, will you be my mentor?
That's a great question. And the answer is going to seem counterintuitive, but relatively simple. Pray. Just pray. Ask for God to lead you to a person to have that kind of relationship with you. And 2, even though it sounds really goofy, ask. I think in AA, the only way that you get a sponsor is by asking somebody to be your sponsor. Is that right? Somebody doesn't come up and say, Daniel, I want to be your sponsor, right?
Right.
You've got to ask somebody. And so you look for somebody that you maybe don't even know, but that you like what you see in them and that you feel safe around. And you say, hey, could we have that kind of relationship? And they may say yes or no. I think it's not uncommon in AA for somebody to ask somebody to be their sponsor, and they say, you know what, I'm already sponsoring somebody else. I can't I can't add another person. God's in that. God, if you're praying for that person to be that mentor, to be that accountability partner in your life, that's a prayer that God wants desperately to answer. He wants desperately. That's a prayer that God wants to answer. And so, yeah, just pray. And then look for somebody that you trust, and then ask them. And ideally, somebody that when you look at their life, you think they've probably walked where I have. It doesn't always have to be somebody older, but oftentimes that's the Scripture talks about older men, older women, younger women pursuing that. Yeah.
Probably makes some sense, at least in recovery. They talk about it being with somebody of the same sex.
Same sex, yep. That's the best.
Same sex.
Safest.
Yeah.
And I was told to look at someone's recovery. If they got what you want, you go up to them and ask them.
Yeah.
And I did stock a few people for my first sponsor, and I was like, oh, wow, that's really good. That really stimulated my mind where, it helps because, the mental aspect of this is that, I'm sick and I can't fix me with a sick mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. That asking for God's help, again, maybe people have done this their whole life. Doesn't come natural to me. Amazing the value or the benefits of... That sounds greedy, but since I've started incorporating God into, God, please help me clean up my business. Help me to help bring the people into my life that will help me run a successful company. Help me to eliminate the people that I need to eliminate from my company. Just God, please help me to clean up my finances, help me to be smarter and more honest with what I'm doing. Just the amount of that. Again, maybe everybody else has always done that. Didn't come natural to me.
That's good.
Learn that in church. Question number 2 from the
Ermit
Lou.
Ermit Lou group.
life group. Can we get a list of different support groups people can join if they're struggling with addictions?
Yeah, that's great question. There are in our support recovery ministry at Northpointe right now, the only group that we have going internally at Northpointe is Grief Share. So that's not an addiction group, but it's helping people work through the stuff associated with their grief that again causes alienation, causes walls, causes spiral, all that kind of stuff. There are we would love to have a full slate of recovery groups at Northpointe, but that's dependent on leaders. We always say we're not going to start a group without a leader, and we're not going to go begging somebody to be a leader because that's a recipe for disaster. Somebody has to have a sense of calling and ministry. And man, if you think, you know what, I think God may be calling me to lead Celebrate Recovery so that we can initiate that. That's the coolest thing. That is something that we're praying for. There are all kinds of recovery groups. At Northpointe, we've had divorce care, which is, again, it's not an addiction, but it's having some people that can walk with you through a very difficult time and help you begin to have some perspective and begin to see with clarity all of the stuff that's going on, and work through the things that you need to work through at that point in time. We've had in the past, we've had groups for people that struggle with eating addictions, all kinds of stuff. And one of the people in our life group, side note, that was just really good to say. Anytime that you're dealing with anybody that talks about their addictions, never discount whatever it is that they are addicted to. Again, somebody in our life group talked about an eating disorder group that they were a part of, and that this person came to the group that was young, really attractive, slender, all kinds of stuff, and said people said, "Why are you here?" And she said, "Because I'm bulimic. I purge." And they said, "Yeah, right." It was like, oh, that's not a real thing, because they were all very heavy, and that it took a tremendous amount of courage for that person to come back to the group, because her addiction was dismissed as, oh, it doesn't really matter. That's not what we're dealing with, so that doesn't matter. Man, anytime anybody comes clean, it doesn't matter what it is. Don't discount that. Real stuff. So,
Right.
We need to finish up. Let me say one last thing, and then we'll conclude. I just want to go back and hit the 12-step waltz thing again. It's really easy. In church, Deb and I had a conversation Sunday afternoon after the service, and I just said, there are so many people I know that do steps 1, 2, and 3 in the context of Christianity and never get past that. I had a sermon-based question that said, how many times have you ever been in a church and prayed the sinner's prayer? Raise your hands, prayed the sinner's prayer, because it's a very common thing for people to say, oh yeah, I've done that 6, 7, 8, 10 times, whatever. Raise my hand. Yeah, God, my life's a mess. I need you. That's step 1, 2, and 3. Recognizing that you've got this addiction you can't control, that your life has become unmanageable, that you do believe that God can help and that God is there and able to help. And so we just do that and go back to that and go back to that and go back to that, and never get to steps 4 and 5, where we begin to really do the hard work to say, okay, what's at the root of this that's driving me, that's separating me from God? And so I just wanted to reinforce that again, because I think that's powerful. That it's powerful. I think in a step group, and I think it's powerful in the church. We need more AA. No, we need more Jesus in AA and more AA in the church. So
Love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
good stuff. You want to land the plane?
Thank you. It's I don't even remember how we close it.
It doesn't matter.
It's been great having you guys.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your transparency, and know that God's using you, using your stories. That's cool stuff.
All right, we'll see you next Sunday.